Good morning from the UK. I hope I'm coming through clearly. It was fascinating to hear the students talk. I was interested that they find the course demanding and still have time, if I heard it correctly, for iced lattes. I thought it'd be interesting to go through what one might call the intellectual foundations of herd behavior. This matters, of course, enormously in economics, but also far beyond economics. Here are two examples from financial markets. Our student speakers mentioned their interest in financial markets. We see here the Bitcoin and so-called meme stock, GameStop shares, the tremendous rises and falls. We'd like to understand this kind of herd behavior in financial traders. But the relevance of herd behavior, although often economists, I think, don't think this through carefully, goes far wider. Here's a graph covering 100 years of the real house price in the United States of America. I've stopped the graph just around 2010, and around 2003, the real price of US homes reached a century record level. From that point, US house prices actually doubled in about 2 or 3 years. There was enormous speculative buying, you might say, or in the modern jargon, sometimes we talk about fear of missing out. FOMO is what the financial markets often talk about. You can see it was followed by an enormous crash. And many of us believe that this was the trigger for the very damaging worldwide financial crisis of 2008. Let me go through the main ideas that I'll talk about, then I'll go back, of course, and take them more slowly. When I look at the world, I see imitation, emulation everywhere. Perhaps people don't process that very clearly. I'll argue that this is in general driven by relative feelings, relativistic feelings, you might say, and that will link it to real herd behavior. Interdisciplinary work was mentioned earlier, and I will talk for a few minutes about herd behavior in the wild. The crucial parameter is going to be a second derivative. This will be a highly non-technical talk, but I want to allude to a little bit of mathematics. I'll take you through this more slowly, of course, eventually, but if you think about a utility from status term within your overall utility function, let's call it V, function V, and you get status from your action being better than somebody else's action, A star. So within the V function here, I've got a gap between A and A star. It will turn out that the crucial parameter is not the first derivative, but it's the second derivative. I'll come back, of course, to this. I think that herd behavior should be studied centrally within economics and quantitative sociology and psychology. And I will argue that the madness of crowds will be back in your lifetime. And perhaps if you can think your way through what we might call the theory and practice of herd behavior, understanding herd behavior, that might save you perhaps even a lot of money one day. Here's a quote from C. Mackay: "Men think in herds, they go mad; in herds, they recover slowly." You might think this would be in the Wall Street Journal or the Financial Times over the last year, where people were worrying about whether the AI boom in the stock market was going to turn out to be a bubble. In fact, this goes back, getting on for 200 years. The book by Charles Mackay, I would say, is still greatly worth reading on delusions and the madness of crowds. Now, herd behavior is very natural, as we'll see in a second when we talk about animals in the field and so on. But the problem, and this graphic is meant to bring back, if you've read it, the beginning of Thomas Hardy's book, Far from the Madding Crowd. Of course, herd behavior, when it gets out of hand, can be dangerous for the group. So why does that happen? Quite a lot of economists mention herd behavior without perhaps being clear where the words actually came from. So here's a scientific question that you may never have considered. When you look at the sky, you'll take it for granted. You often see flocks of birds like this, but why do they cluster together? If you look under the surface of the river or the ocean, why do fish cluster together? What explains that? The classic article on herd behavior was written by a very good applied mathematician, a mathematical zoologist called W.D. Hamilton. I would recommend reading it. It has his handwritten drawings of creatures in it, as well as very interesting mathematics. Remarkably, although the paper's been cited thousands and thousands of times in the science journal, last time I checked, it had never been cited in an economics journal. Now, before Hamilton, the theory of herd behavior was much more like an assumption, you might say. It was believed by zoologists that animals had some sort of communitarian instinct. They just clustered together, that they were driven by instinct. That's obviously not an explanation, more like a statement of the facts to be explained. Hamilton argued, very much like a microeconomic theorist, actually, I don't know whether he ever studied any economics, that a rational animal clusters with the others because its relative position is what matters. So an animal in the field or under the surface of the ocean and so on, an animal has a utility function that is defined on its relative position, that is position relative to the other animals. Now, why is that? If we think about the cheetah, if it is a cheetah chasing the zebras here, the answer is that, of course, predators take from the outside. So rational behavior for me as a vulnerable animal is to get well inside you, and preferably your friends as well, to try and get away from the edges where the predators may take me down. That principle applies, in my judgment, to humans as well, if not exactly in the form of a predator on the outside, but the mathematics will come out the same. Nevertheless, there's a history of thinking in economics about herd behavior in quite a different way. That is, thinking of it much more as about revealing information. So imagine that a fire bell goes off, people start to file out. Others who didn't hear the fire bell see people filing out. They think those individuals must have some information, so they exhibit herd behavior, they also leave. Now, the problem with that is that so much of what we see in the world can't be explained in that way. These young women are not wearing orange and black because this is the optimal body temperature for human beings and so on. Fashion, herding for pure relative reasons, I think, dominates the world. I'm going to go through the principles of a proof in a second, but let me start with everyday evidence. This is a watch, of course. It has a black strap, a white face, a silver surround, and silver hands. This watch keeps perfect time, and you can dive to 1 meter quite safely, according to the manufacturer. You can click on the internet if you like the look of this watch. I'm not on commission. And you can buy that watch for $5 US. Here's another watch. This watch has a black strap, a white face, a silver surround, and silver hands. This watch also keeps perfect time, and the manufacturers don't explain how deep you can dive wearing this watch. You can click on the internet tonight, and if you have the right kind of credit card, you can buy this watch for $50,000 US, $5.50,000. Perhaps I might remind you that everybody who purchases these watches is carrying a mobile phone that tells them the time in the first place. So whatever is going on here as a marketplace, as economic transactions, it's very hard to believe it's anything to do with timekeeping. I thought it'd be fun to look up eBay. The market for men's watches in the world is absolutely fascinating, and it's an extremely deep one. If you go to eBay and click on men's watches, you'll be able to buy something like 2,000 different watches. So at the end of last week, when I was making up these slides, I ordered the eBay watches by price, and this is the most expensive watch. Maybe it's sold by now on eBay. The price is £389,000 sterling. This watch has a slight disadvantage, although you might feel that the price could also be viewed as a disadvantage. It has the slight disadvantage that this is not new. This is a second-hand watch, but it has one offsetting advantage I like to think, which is free delivery, ladies and gentlemen. Now let's build on this and hypothesize, as many sensible economists and thinkers through the centuries have. Let's think of people as having, in a really foundational way, concern about relative position. We can actually check that now inside the brain. Remarkable experiments were done by a team led by Armin Falk at the University of Bonn, a very talented researcher. Today is not the day for me to take you through the details, but you can see here there are two fMRI scanners. And what the team did was to measure, let's say, my brain, what's happening to the reward areas of my brain as you're in the other scanner and you are given more money, and I'm told that you're getting more money. That's the nature of the experiment. This was published in the famous journal Science, as well as in the Journal of Public Economics. And here's one of the key conclusions. Simply outperforming the other person could be seen in the reward areas of the brain. Or to put it differently, the analysts realized that when somebody discovered they were getting paid less than the other person, they could see in the person's brain the blood draining away from the reward areas of the brain. So you and I, you may not think so, you and I want to be high up the monkey pack, whether we're willing to face up to that or not. Here's a different kind of evidence. If one estimates happiness equations of all sorts, then relative income variables show up more strongly than actual income. So if you want to understand my happiness, it's sensible to ask me what I earn. In part, that will give you information. But a better question to ask me is, how much does Andrew Oswald earn relative to the other economics professors in his corridor? That's what we found from happiness equations, you might say. Now, this issue is very central to modern society. Here's the hair bubble of the 1960s. I was part of this. I won't show you any old photographs. Hats, all sorts of peer pressure on health choices, social norms about weight, and so on. How might we think about understanding this more formally? Now, this is the simplest utility function that I could write down to capture the idea. There'll be two terms in the utility part, U and V, and there'll be a cost function, C of A. So U of A is the direct bit of utility. When I have a better watch, I get some benefit from it. This is the indirect, you might call it the status part of utility, driven by the gap between my A and other people's A star. Now, let's think about solving this small mathematical problem. Along the way, we'll prove that concavity of V leads to imitation, and convexity of the V function produces anti-herding. I'll come back to that. So think of watches just to be clear. If we look at the turning point in this function, this, of course, is the direct marginal benefit from a nicer watch. You can insert expensive cards in here or whatever you like, but I'm going to stick with watches as an example. So that's the direct marginal benefit. That's a standard utility way to think. This is the status benefit. It's another marginal utility, but this is over my enjoyment from the fact that my A might be better than your A star. And this is a very real problem. I remember recently I went into a shop and I thought my watch had broken. What kind of watch should I buy? You have to look deep inside yourself. I thought, I'm not the kind of person who buys a £20,000 watch. That's ridiculous, and so on. So people make very subtle, probably subconscious decisions about these things. And that's the marginal cost of a nicer watch. So I'll assume this is a well-determined concave program. And we can prove the following result. I will not take you through the proof, but it's only 2 or 3 lines of extra algebra. And it goes like this. If the V part of my utility function, which is my concern over status, is concave from below, then I will be a herder. If I'm a different sort of person and I have convex utility over status, an accelerating function, you might say, then I will be an anti-herder. I will stand against the crowd on purpose. Let's do that again in words. This is the utility from status. A is my action. in whatever class of actions you wish to think about. A star is what the other people are doing. In everyday English, at least economists' English, if there's diminishing marginal utility from extra status, I will copy others. That comes out of the mathematics. It's driven by the second derivative, not by the first derivative, interestingly. If there's accelerating utility from extra status, so I love it, status so much that it gets better and better for me at the margin, then I will stand against the herd. I'll be a deviant, you might say. And these issues matter enormously in the financial markets. If you can just see the red sentence at the end here, this was in the FT fairly recently. I thought this was so interesting. This is Mr. Harnett talking about fund managers. There is career risk in the fear of missing out. FOMO is the acronym that's called on. There is career risk in the fear of missing out. And the issue there, in my opinion, is that the returns to fund managers are heavily concave from below. So I'm pleased as a fund manager if I outperform the others. But the real disaster for me is if, and this is the concave part going down, going sharply down, the real damage for me, and I might lose my job, is if I fall far behind the others. So I imagine all fund managers are aware that it doesn't really matter if they lose their clients' money, as long as all the other fund managers are losing their clients' money as well. I believe anti-herd is hugely valuable to society, certainly in stock markets, but also in many other features, sociological features of the world in which we live in. It seems to me fair to say that virtually no economist, although some economists are built on this theory, which I had a hand in once upon a time, it seems to me that economists think very little about the nature of anti-herding and where it comes from and why it might be so valuable. In my judgment, the second derivative of this is one of the most fundamental parameters in all of social science, not just economics, quantitative sociology, and far, far beyond. The second derivative, not the first derivative. We have little idea, that's the intriguing thing, about whether status enters in a convex or a concave way, but I think observing the world, as well as thinking about routine thinking in our discipline, we might believe a lot of people have diminishing marginal utility from status. To conclude, these are the ideas I started with. I'll leave them with you, if I may, as well, ladies and gentlemen. Emulation, imitation, I think is absolutely central to human life, but often it's not at the front of people's minds. If you're sitting here wearing, sitting in your country, wearing a pair of blue jeans, and I'll admit to you that although I've got a jacket on, I've also got blue jeans on, then you might ask yourself, are you making an independent choice to wear blue jeans, or are you just practicing herd behavior and it hasn't occurred to you? Herding is driven routinely by relative feelings. This takes us back to the wild, where the term herd behavior first came from. The crucial parameter, I would say a crucial parameter in the whole of our lives, is V double prime over status. I think we need to understand herd behavior better, certainly in economics, but more broadly. And unless you're older than me, which seems mildly unlikely, I think the madness of crowds will be back in your lifetime. And one day, perhaps it might help you, save you some money, thinking through all this and trying to evaluate whether this is a bubble on the way and you should or should not invest. Thank you very much for listening, and good luck in your decisions.